Today we're going to continue our ecology unit and we are going to start lesson number 7, which is called Ecological Succession in Virginia's Aquatic and Terrestrial Ecosystems. And you're going to need your note taker that looks like this. Your note taker is just 1 page long, but please have this out so you can take notes as you watch the video. So let's get started. So first we're going to start with the definition of ecological succession. And this is the process by which the structure of a biological community evolves over time. Ecological succession is a predictable change in the sequence of species that is established in an area over time. So we're going to learn about the different types of successions in just a moment. But first, let's start with some vocabulary word. And I believe that these words are at the bottom of your note taker. So let's start with pioneer species. These are the first species to colonize barren environments. So here we see an example of pioneer species on these rocks. So for example, lichen is this symbiotic and mutualistic association between fungi and algae. And then we see moss here also as pioneer species growing on this barren rock. Now the climax community is the final stage of succession, resulting in a stable, relatively unchanged community. So what is the climax community in most of Virginia? Here it is. You recognize it, right? We have a temperate deciduous oak hickory forest. But now, could there be other kinds of climax communities other than forests? So for example, if you live in a different place, could your climax community be something else? Is there such a thing? And of course the answer is yes, because if you live in the ocean, then of course it's a marine climax community. Or it could be a grassland or rainforest or a desert, depending on where you live, right? So these are the same things as biomes. All right, so let's look at these two types of succession. So we said that succession is a predictable change to a community over time. So these are the two types of succession. So primary succession is when you have a brand new community that forms. For example, there's new land created from a lava flow or earthquake, and it is completely barren. That's a primary succession. So what's going to happen? You're going to start with some pioneer species that are mosses and lichens, and then you're going to get grasses and perennials, and then you're going to get intermediate species, and then you're going to get your climax community. So for primary succession, you start completely barren. There was nothing there, so you start around here, right? For secondary succession, that's when a community starts over after a natural disaster destroys it. So in secondary succession, you already had an established community, but some type of disaster destroyed it. So it could be a fire, it could be a volcanic eruption, it could be a tidal wave, it could be a hurricane, something that destroys the community. So then the community has to start over again. Okay? So it does. It starts over again with pioneer species and then intermediate species and then climax communities. Climax community, sorry. But something to point out is that a secondary succession process happens much faster than a primary succession process. Because in a secondary succession process, what happened to the soil after the disaster? So let's say here, what happened to the soil after all of this burned? Well, there was a lot of nutrients in the soil, right? So because there were organisms already there, all of those nutrients are in the soil now, and that means that the succession process to reach a climax community is going to happen a lot faster. So secondary successions happen a lot faster than primary successions. So in your note taker, You are to draw what is happening in a primary succession and a secondary succession. So you can pause this video and then you can start your drawing. So remember that in primary succession, you're going to start right here with your pioneer species, right? You're going to start with something that's barren, and then the pioneer species start growing on that barren rock. When you draw your secondary succession, you're going to draw a well-established climax community that gets destroyed by a disaster. So you're going to start here with the secondary succession drawing. Okay. So what are some of the factors leading to succession? So in primary succession, you can have lava, sterilized landscapes, newly formed sand dunes, deposited rocks, retreating glaciers, volcanic islands, seeds blown by wind to an area where there's nothing there, decomposition of plants, and bird migration that allows for seed dispersal. So all of these factors lead to primary succession, to succession of a community where nothing was there before. Now, what are some of the factors leading to secondary succession? There has to be some natural disaster or a major disturbance like a flood, wildfire, landslide, lava flow, human activity, farming, or construction. So here is a picture of Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption. So we see what Mount St. Helens in Washington State looked like before May 18th, 1980, so before the volcano erupted. So we see that it was a well-established community. After the volcano erupted, everything was left barren, and I believe this picture was taken many years later. So we see how the community is starting to rebuild, right? In this process of secondary succession. So where do we see succession in Virginia's aquatic ecosystems? So some examples of aquatic ecosystems include freshwater rivers, lakes, streams, and ponds. So keep in mind the succession can also happen in aquatic environments, and we see it happening in ponds. So here we see a pond, right? So as time goes on, perhaps there's some climate change, something that will make this pond dry out. So then you start seeing that the ecosystem starts changing into a more swampy, mucky area, right, with less water. And then eventually that pond can be completely dried out, and then you get a different type of community here, like a forest. So here you see a pond succession, right? How gradually this pond has changed into a different environment. And of course, we see succession in Virginia's terrestrial, that means land, ecosystem, right? So we know that Virginia's climax community is temperate deciduous oak hickory forest. But how did we get there? Well, we got there through primary succession, exposed rocks, lichens and mosses that grew on the rocks, grasses and weeds then started growing, mixed herbaceous plants grew around, and shrubs, and then you got a young forest, and then you got a mature forest, including white oak and hickory trees, and then eventually you ended up with your climax forest or community. And that's what our temperate deciduous oak forest looks like. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you took good notes, and that's it.